Snow fell in soft, swirling flakes, drifting slowly across the endless white of the Arctic tundra. The low sun hung like a pale lantern in the sky, casting long shadows over the icy plains and turning each ridge of frozen snow into a glimmering sculpture. A faint wind whispered across the frozen landscape, carrying the scent of distant water and the sharp tang of ice. Amid this stillness, a tiny movement broke the perfection of the frozen world. A cub of polar bear, fur still damp and flecked with snow, rolled clumsily on the hard, glittering ice, squealing in delight as it tumbled over itself. Its small paws kicked up snowflakes that danced like tiny sparks in the pale sunlight. Nearby, its mother watched with careful, calm eyes. Her massive white form seemed to blend into the ice, a silent sentinel keeping constant vigil over her playful offspring. Every twitch of her ears, every sniff of the cold wind, suggested a mind alert to danger even in this moment of peace. The cub bounced and rolled, oblivious to the sharp chill or the hidden threats that might lurk just beyond sight. The mother's head tilted slightly as she followed its movements, muscles coiled beneath her thick fur, ready to spring if needed. She exhaled, and the frost of her breath hung in the air, dissolving slowly into the soft winter light. The cub tumbled again, landing with a small puff of snow, and let out a happy squeak, pawing at a sparkling patch of ice. For a moment, it seemed that the frozen world itself had paused to watch this little display of innocence. But beneath the still, peaceful surface, the Arctic hummed with quiet tension. Small, almost invisible tracks pressed into the snow told a story that went unnoticed by the cub. Faint paw prints, round and deliberate, tracing a path from the distant ridge. Wolves. The thought of predators seemed distant in this bright, glimmering world. Yet the mother's shoulders tensed as she scanned the horizon. Shadows stretched across the ice, distorted by the low sun, and a haunting howl drifted faintly on the wind, a warning carried from far away. The cub, oblivious, rolled again, now sliding on a slick patch of ice. Its squeals rang out, high and joyful, echoing faintly against the distant ice cliffs. The mother moved closer, massive paws crunching softly on the frozen surface. Her body a gentle shadow over the cub, a promise of protection. She nudged it lightly with her snout, and the cub looked up, eyes wide and sparkling, then rolled onto its back, paws flailing in delight. The tiny bear's laughter seemed almost a defiance of the cold, harsh world around it, a fragile joy held against the relentless, icy emptiness. The mother's nose twitched, inhaling the faintest hint of danger. Her cub's laughter cut through the silent landscape, and for a heartbeat, the world felt perfect and whole. Then the wind shifted. A sharper, colder gust swept across the tundra, carrying the distant, eerie sound of multiple wolves moving with careful, practiced stealth. The tracks in the snow became more visible, tiny depressions that betrayed the approach of something large and hungry. The mother froze, ears angled toward the sound, nostrils flaring. Her eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon where the snow met the sky, searching for movement in the blinding white. The cub, unaware of the subtle warning signs, crawled toward the edge of a slight rise in the ice, curiosity guiding its small body. It pawed at the wind-blown snow, sending sparkling particles floating in the sunlight. The mother's massive form shifted, moving slightly between the cub and the unseen threat. Her body radiated quiet power, and even in stillness, her presence seemed to ripple across the frozen landscape. She made a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl, more a whisper of caution meant to anchor the cub and warn it without scaring it into panic. Snowflakes twirled lazily around them, but the serenity of the moment was fragile. Each quiet snap of ice underfoot, each faint howl carried by the wind, added to the tension that hummed beneath the surface of this frozen world. The mother polar bear's gaze never wavered from the horizon. Her cub squeaked again, rolling onto its belly, and looked toward her, seeking guidance, reassurance. There was a trust between them deeper than words, instinct meeting instinct. The mother moved closer still, letting the cub feel her presence, her warmth against the biting cold. The cub nuzzled against her massive side for a moment before bouncing away again, curiosity pushing it forward. Even in this simple game of exploration, the Arctic was already shaping the story of survival. The distant tracks told a tale of hidden predators, shadows hinted at lurking danger, and the wind carried whispers of the world's merciless rules. The mother's eyes flicked constantly from her cub to the horizon, reading the subtle changes in light, snow, and sound, a careful calculation of threat and safety. Every muscle in her body seemed poised between motion and stillness, a delicate balance of grace and power. The cub squeaked once more, tumbling over a ridge and rolling onto a patch of ice so smooth it glistened like glass in the sunlight. For a fleeting moment, the world seemed to hold its breath, the cub's innocence shining against the endless white, the mother's silent watchfulness a shield against unseen threats, and the Arctic itself, a breathtaking, merciless expanse of ice and sky, stretching infinitely in all directions. The soft orange light of the sun painted long shadows, and the snowflakes danced like tiny ghosts in the frozen wind. Beneath the beauty, a subtle tension lingered, like a note held too long in a quiet room, a warning that this fragile calm could shatter at any instant. The mother lowered her massive head, nudging the cub gently back toward her. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, reflected both love and caution, and in that glance lay the entire Arctic story. The joy of survival, the weight of vigilance, and the fragile wonder of life in a world that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. The cub tumbled once more, squealing in delight, and the mother exhaled, the warm breath dissipating into the icy air. But even as the tiny bear rolled and explored, the wind carried faint echoes of the approaching threat. Somewhere out there, the wolf tracks traced a slow, deliberate path across the frozen plain, waiting, watching, circling. And in the silent white world, the mother polar bear remained still, a statue of strength and love, the quiet guardian of her innocent cub. The Arctic held its breath, the snowflakes fell, and the fragile peace balanced on a knife's edge. The cub was safe for now, but the tundra had already begun to whisper its warning, and the mother's eyes never left the horizon. The world erupted in a sudden, violent burst of sound and movement. One moment, the Arctic was quiet and serene, the snow drifting lazily in the soft sunlight. The next, the silence was shattered by a chorus of snarls, snapping teeth, and the thunder of paws against ice. The baby polar bear had wandered too far, chasing the glint of sunlight on a patch of frozen water, when the wolves emerged. Their eyes glimmered with hunger, low growls vibrating through the air, and the cub froze, unsure of the threat looming over it. Its small body trembled as the wolves closed in, circling with practiced precision, noses sniffing the wind and ears alert for any sign of weakness. Snow flew in jagged sprays as the cub attempted to retreat, sliding on the slick ice. Its claws scratched desperately for grip, leaving shallow gouges in the frozen surface. But each step only brought the wolves closer. A sharp fang snapped just inches from its paw, and a piercing scream tore from the cub's throat, a sound raw and instinctive, carrying across the frozen plain. The wind seemed to catch and carry the cry, echoing it across ridges and valleys of ice, making the vast expanse feel impossibly large and terrifying. The cub's small heart raced in panic, every muscle trembling as it spun and lunged to escape. Yet the pack was relentless. Then, from the distance, a sudden vibration of movement cut across the ice. The mother polar bear appeared like a force of nature, her massive form a blur of white against the stark landscape. She ran with terrifying grace, muscles rippling beneath her thick fur, breath steaming in the frigid air, eyes locked on the chaos unfolding before her. The cub's cries seemed to drive her forward, each step a promise of protection. The ice groaned under her weight, and small shards flew outward with every stride. Her presence transformed the battlefield. Snow whirled around her like a storm, a white tempest racing toward the helpless cub. The cub stumbled, sliding into a shallow depression in the ice, and looked back with wide, terrified eyes. The wolves bared teeth, ears flattened, advancing with a cruel rhythm, but the mother's roar cut through the frozen air, a sound deep, commanding, and unyielding. The wolves paused for a fraction of a second, uncertainty flickering in their eyes as they registered the mother's approach. But hunger and instinct drove them onward, snarling, snapping, circling closer, trying to divide and conquer. The cub's claws sank into the ice, trembling as it struggled to find leverage, snow spraying in chaotic clouds around it, each second stretching impossibly long in terror. Time seemed to slow. Each breath hung visibly in the icy air, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the silence between chaos. The mother barreled through the snow, eyes burning with fury and fear, and the wolves shifted their focus. Her massive paws crashed into the ice, scattering shards like crystal in all directions. She lunged, powerful shoulders slamming into the nearest wolf, sending it sprawling into the snow. The cub shrieked again, this time a sound of hope rather than helplessness, scrambling to its mother's side. The other wolves hesitated, caught between their hunger and the unrelenting force of the mother bear. The ice itself seemed to shiver under the intensity of the battle. Snow whipped in blinding sheets, kicked up by the stamping feet of predator and defender alike. The cub's small body pressed close to the mother, every nerve on fire with fear, claws scrabbling in frantic desperation for purchase. A wolf lunged again, and the mother pivoted with inhuman precision, teeth snapping in warning, jaws clashing inches from the cub's fur. Each moment was a test of survival, the raw fury of nature meeting the tender instinct of a mother, and in the center, the tiny cub, caught between life and death, trembling yet unwilling to move from the protective shadow of its parent. The wolves hesitated as the mother bore down, her every movement a calculated mix of power and precision. She roared again, a sound that carried across the icy tundra, shaking the snow from the distant cliffs. The pack backed slowly, circling outward, reluctant but recognizing the unyielding force before them. The cub huddled against the mother's massive side, eyes wide and shiny, small teeth chattering as fear mixed with relief. Every tremble in its body mirrored the fragile balance between despair and hope, between predator and protector, between life and the cold, merciless expanse of the Arctic. The mother's breath came in heavy, steaming clouds, her chest rising and falling in controlled fury. She pressed herself against the cub, nudging it toward safety, every step measured, every glance vigilant. The wolves, now wary, moved away with low growls, retreating into the snow-laden horizon, their eyes never leaving the mother and cub. The storm of movement slowly subsided. The snow settled around them, flakes drifting lazily again as if the Arctic itself were exhaling after a held. Cub pressed its small face against its mother, licking her fur, trembling in a mixture of fear, relief, and awe. For a long moment, the world was silent except for the muffled crunch of snow beneath the mother's paws and the soft exhale of warm breath in the cold air. The cub nestled against her side, tiny body seeking warmth, eyes blinking slowly as it tried to comprehend the sudden terror that had passed. The mother lowered her head, licking the cub gently, nuzzling it with careful attention, a slow reassurance that she would not abandon it. The Arctic, once again still, seemed impossibly vast and beautiful, yet the memory of danger lingered in every shadow, every ridge of ice. The cub lifted its head briefly, looking out toward the distant horizon, wide eyes reflecting both fear and wonder. The mother's massive shadow stretched across the snow, a silent promise of protection and fierce love. The wind shifted, carrying the faint howl of wolves far away, a reminder that danger would always be part of this frozen world. But for now, survival had been claimed. The cub's trembling eased, small paws kneading into the snow as it pressed closer to its mother. The Arctic held its breath in the lingering quiet, the chaos receding like a distant storm. Finally, the mother and cub moved slowly across the icy plains, side by side. The snowflakes, soft and sparkling, drifted over them like tiny stars fallen to the earth. The cub's small steps were careful, guided by the steady rhythm of its mother's powerful stride. And though the threat had passed for now, the lessons of the Arctic were clear. Vigilance, courage, and the unbreakable bond between mother and child were the only shields against the harshness of nature. The mother's shadow fell long across the ice, a protective veil that promised safety and strength in a world that could turn violent without warning. The cub nestled closer, eyes half closed, heart still racing but anchored in the unshakable presence of the one being who would never let harm come to it. The Arctic seemed to hold its breath as the mother polar bear charged across the frozen plain. Each step sent shards of ice skittering in all directions, and her massive paws struck the ground with a thunderous rhythm that echoed across the silent tundra. Snow whipped around her in a white blur, whipped by the force of her motion, creating a storm that mirrored the fury and determination burning inside her. The cub, caught in the center of the chaos just moments before, froze in a mixture of fear and awe, watching as the towering figure of its mother barreled toward the pack of wolves. Every muscle in her body moved with precision, honed by instinct and necessity, and the world seemed to shrink around her, focusing entirely on the goal: reach her cub and protect it at all costs. The wolves, sensing the oncoming force, snarled and snapped, their growls harsh and full of frustration. One leapt toward the cub, teeth bared, but the mother's arrival shattered their attack before it could reach its mark. Her jaws snapped shut in a warning that carried across the ice like a clap of thunder, and the nearest wolf yelped, retreating a few steps. She pivoted with astonishing agility for her size, blocking the path of another who lunged with reckless hunger. The cub whimpered, pressed against the ground for cover, and the mother's eyes, dark and unflinching, locked onto her child as if to silently promise, "You are safe now." The wolves scattered under the weight of her fury. Some ran into the distance, keeping just beyond the reach of her massive paws, while others circled cautiously, unwilling to challenge the sheer power and resolve radiating from the mother bear. The cub, trembling but alive, looked up with wide, trusting eyes, and the mother nudged it gently with her snout. Her warm breath steamed in the frigid air, enveloping the tiny bear in a protective cocoon of fur and reassurance. She lowered her head, licking the snow from its coat, her tongue careful but firm, a slow, deliberate act that spoke of relief, tenderness, and fierce protection. For a moment, the Arctic returned to silence. The violent roar of the chase and the snapping of fangs faded into memory, replaced by the soft hiss of wind over ice and the gentle fall of snowflakes that glimmered in the low sunlight. The cub pressed itself closer against its mother, tiny body trembling not with fear now, but with the lingering rush of adrenaline and relief. It nuzzled into her fur, burying its nose in the thick warmth of her side, and the mother lowered her massive head to rest gently over it, a living shield against the harsh world. The bond between them was palpable, a quiet but unshakable connection born of instinct, love, and survival. The mother moved slowly, guiding her cub across the frozen expanse. Each step was deliberate, steady, and protective, as if she could feel the fragile weight of her child's trust pressing against her very bones. The ice glimmered in the sunlight, shards sparkling like tiny diamonds scattered across the white wasteland. Snow swirled around them in lazy spirals, brushing against fur and paw alike. The cub staggered occasionally, weak-legged from fear and exertion, and the mother bent her massive form over it, nudging it forward gently, encouraging it to continue. Her eyes flicked constantly to the horizon, scanning for lingering threats, for any hint of danger that might still linger in the shadows of the icy world. The wind carried faint, distant howls, reminders that the wolves were still near, though unwilling to return directly. The mother did not glance at them, focusing entirely on her cub. Every movement, every subtle shift of her weight, was a lesson in calmness, resilience, and trust. The cub followed her lead instinctively, paws sinking into the snow with careful determination, fur brushed by the icy gusts that had once threatened its life. Each step they took together was a quiet triumph over the chaos that had erupted moments before, a proof of survival, a statement of the strength and endurance of maternal instinct. As the cub grew steadier, curiosity slowly returned to its small, bright eyes. It raised its head and glanced around, the landscape now seeming less threatening and more wondrous than it had moments ago. The sun glinted off frozen ridges and ice patches, painting the Arctic in soft gold and pale blue. The mother allowed a small pause, giving the cub a moment to breathe, to regain strength, and to understand the scale of the world it had just survived. The contrast between the violence of the attack and the gentle calm of the aftermath was stark, and yet the cub seemed to sense the lesson hidden in it. The world was harsh, but protection, courage, and instinct could turn danger into survival. The mother lowered herself again, gently nudging her cub toward a small ridge that offered shelter from the wind. The cub stumbled, paws skidding across the ice, and the mother leaned down, her massive weight pressing slightly against it, steadying it without force. The gesture was subtle but profound, a demonstration of care through presence rather than words. The cub shivered, not from cold now, but from the lingering memory of fear, and pressed its nose into her fur, trembling against the reassuring warmth of its mother's body. For a long while, they stayed together on the ridge, the mother vigilant, eyes scanning the horizon, muscles relaxed but ready, and the cub slowly calming under the weight of her protection. Snowflakes drifted past like tiny dancers, the sunlight glinting off ice crystals to create a... Finally, the mother rose, towering and resolute, and nudged her cub gently along the ridge. They moved together, side by side, the cub following her lead with newfound confidence. Each step was a quiet celebration of survival, a testament to the strength of love and instinct in the frozen wilderness. The Arctic stretched endlessly around them, cruel and beautiful in equal measure, but the mother and cub seemed to carry their own warmth, their own light, a force that could not be touched by distance or cold. The mother paused one last time, glancing back at the path they had traveled. Snow settled gently over the faint marks of the wolves' retreat, erasing their presence and leaving the pristine landscape once more untouched. The cub leaned into her side, eyes half closed, heart still racing but anchored in trust. She lowered her head once more, brushing her muzzle over the cub's fur, a final act of reassurance and quiet love. Around them, the Arctic seemed to breathe again, the wind softening, the sun glinting off frozen peaks, and the vast, harsh world held a fleeting moment of peace. In that silence, the story of survival, instinct, and maternal love felt eternal. The cub's small body pressed against its mother, trembling but alive, and the mother's shadow stretched long across the ice, a living testament to the fierce, protective bond that had turned terror into relief. Nature, with all its cruelty and beauty, had tested them, and together they had endured. The world was both fragile and resilient, harsh and compassionate, and in the quiet glow of sunlight on ice, the mother and cub continued across the Arctic, their steps measured, their bond unbroken, and their lives forever shaped by the